General Hospital spoilers reveal that Willow had long known the ache of betrayal, the sting of being misunderstood, and the isolation of watching her life unravel one thread at a time. But nothing could have prepared her for the day Sonny approached her, not with sympathy, not even with judgment, but with a cold, calculated proposition that could change everything. As she sat across from him in a quiet, dimly lit corner of his restaurant, she felt the weight of something shift. As though her presence there wasn't an accident but a pivotal moment orchestrated by a man who had spent his life manipulating shadows and secrets. Sonny didn't waste time. He laid it out plainly. His tone calm but razor-sharp. He needed someone close to Natalia. Not for surveillance, not for protection, those jobs were too obvious. What he needed was something more dangerous. He needed someone who could become Natalia's confidant. A woman. A mother. A wounded soul like Willow. Someone who could understand, disarm, and infiltrate without ever raising suspicion. Natalia had begun to act strangely. There were whispers of secret meetings, accounts being drained and redirected, messages sent and then erased before they could be tracked. Her alliance with Sidwell was no longer just rumor, it was becoming a tangible threat to everything Sonny had built. The Corinthos Empire was shifting under his feet, not because of his enemies, but because of those he once allowed into his circle. And Sonny, always a man to act before he was cornered, realized that Natalia's next move could undo years of blood, business, and brutal sacrifices. That's where Willow came in. She was the perfect ghost, emotionally fractured, legally disarmed, morally uncertain. She no longer had the credibility to be seen as a threat. And that invisibility made her powerful. At first, Willow wanted to laugh. The idea of her, used, discarded, betrayed by both Drew and Michael, being anyone's weapon seemed laughable. But then Sonny offered her more than just revenge or redemption. He offered her purpose. He painted a picture of Natalia as not just unstable, but dangerous, capable of unleashing chaos that could hurt not just Sonny's family, but hers. And that's when Willow heard it. The subtext. The implication that if she didn't act, Natalia might one day move against Wiley or Amelia. The very thought made her blood run cold. Sonny never said it outright. He didn't have to. He knew exactly where to press. And when he placed his hand on hers, just for a moment, he didn't offer comfort. He offered alignment. The next morning, Willow stood by her window watching the sunrise. The memory of Sonny's voice echoing in her mind. It wasn't a demand. It was an invitation to become someone else. Someone smarter. Colder. More calculating. Someone who could navigate Natalia's web of deceit while pretending to be caught in it. But if Willow was going to do this, she would need to do it her way. She wouldn't just be a puppet for Sonny. She would be a player in her own right. And if Natalia was planning something catastrophic, then Willow would be the one to stop her, not for Sonny, not even for revenge, but for the children. For herself. For the version of her that still believed in redemption through action, not prayer. But with every decision came risk. And this one was soaked in it. Because Jason, too, had grown suspicious. He had been watching from afar, trying to piece together why Sonny was suddenly more tense, more reactive. He had seen the strange glances between Sonny and Willow. The silence in their footsteps. The sudden secrecy. And Jason, loyal but not blind, began to question whether Sonny was once again letting his obsession with control blind him to consequences. He approached Dante, who had also sensed something shifting. The two men, once brothers in arms, now stood at a new crossroads. And unknowingly, Willow had become the axis on which both of their suspicions turned. As she moved closer to Natalia, carefully orchestrating coffee dates, subtle questions, and emotional resonance, Willow felt herself slipping further from who she used to be. Natalia responded quickly, eager, perhaps even relieved, to find someone who understood the pressures of motherhood. Of being underestimated, of wanting more. She confided in Willow, slowly at first, then recklessly. She spoke of Sidwell in cryptic metaphors, of power being denied to women, of Sonny's refusal to evolve. And Willow listened, absorbing every word, every red flag, every half-truth. She stored them away, unsure if she was building a case or digging a grave. But it wasn't just Natalia's paranoia that was growing. It was Willow's own. She began waking in the night, heart racing, imagining what might happen if Natalia ever suspected her true motives. She started seeing shadows where there were none, flinching when her phone rang, second-guessing every word she said in front of the children. She was becoming what Sonny needed her to be. A double agent. And with that came the unshakable weight of dual loyalty. Because the closer she moved to Natalia, the more she saw pieces of herself, frustrated, isolated, desperate for meaning. And with that came questions. What if Natalia wasn't the enemy Sonny believed she was? What if Sonny was using Willow the same way Drew once had, offering salvation only to chain her to another agenda? And so Willow began to make recordings. Notes. A journal. Not for leverage, not for betrayal, but for memory. For the day when everything would inevitably collapse and she would need to remember who she really was. For now, she would play the role Sonny gave her. She would wear the mask, ask the questions. Smile when Natalia opened her secrets. But deep down, she was preparing for the moment when all the lies would converge. When Jason and Dante would demand the truth. When Sonny would need her to go further. When Natalia would finally realize the friend she trusted was the one orchestrating her downfall. Willow knew the storm was coming. And this time, she wouldn't be swept away by it. She would ride the lightning, alone if she had to. Because survival wasn't about staying pure. It was about staying sharp. And in Sonny's world, that was the only truth that ever mattered. The story was shifting, and at the center of it all was a woman who had been broken, bruised, and nearly buried by the choices of others, Willow. For so long, she had been trapped in Drew's carefully spun web of emotional manipulation and false promises, believing that loyalty and love could blind her to betrayal. But now, something was changing. Sonny, a man long known for his ruthless clarity and ability to recognize a survivor in the making, saw something in Willow that others had dismissed, resilience. And in a move no one anticipated, he was ready to pull her from the wreckage and offer her something no one had ever dared to before, control. This wasn't about love or pity. This was about strategy. Sonny knew that Drew had gone too far, that the lies, the coercion, and the courtroom charade were just the surface of a deeper rot. And Sonny had watched silently as Willow sank further into the abyss, barely recognizing herself, clinging to Drew out of desperation more than conviction. But now, the tide was turning. Sonny wasn't just watching anymore, he was intervening. Not as a savior, but as a tactician. He knew that freeing Willow from Drew's grip wasn't just a personal mission, it was a necessary move in a game where the next misstep could destroy everything. He approached her not with a command, but with a choice. He told her, in his quiet, unshakable way, that there was a world outside of Drew's narrative. That the woman she once was, the fierce mother, the loving partner, the independent thinker, still existed, if only she was willing to reclaim her voice. And perhaps most provocatively, Sonny hinted at the possibility of her working alongside him, not as a pawn, but as an ally. The suggestion alone sent ripples through everything Willow had believed. Could she really stand on her own again? Could she rebuild a life that wasn't constructed by Drew's lies or Michael's expectations? The very idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Willow had lived under control for so long that the thought of true autonomy felt alien. But with Sonny offering her not just an escape but a role, an active, strategic place in something bigger, it was as if someone had thrown open a window in a room that had long been suffocating. And that's when the chaos began. Because Willow considering this alliance sent shockwaves through Port Charles. Michael was stunned when he sensed the shift in her. He had always assumed she would remain locked in the emotional spiral Drew had engineered. But now she was pulling back, asking harder questions, and worst of all, she was smiling again. But not at him. It was the kind of smile that spoke of freedom, of secrets, of plans quietly being made in the background. Jason, ever watchful, noticed the subtle shift too. He saw Willow walking into Sonny's world with tentative steps, and though he didn't yet know the full extent of her intentions, he understood one thing clearly: Drew's control was slipping. And Drew, paranoid, possessive, and now desperate, was beginning to unravel. The more Willow pulled away, the tighter he clung, offering more elaborate lies, more hollow reassurances, and even grander promises of power and family. But it was too late. She had seen the truth behind his eyes, and now, backed by Sonny's support, she was no longer afraid to act on it. She wasn't running from Drew, she was preparing to dismantle him, one carefully placed decision at a time. What made it all more volatile was that Willow's potential involvement with Sonny wasn't just about escaping Drew. It was about positioning herself within a new structure of influence, one where she had agency. One where her pain had purpose. And Sonny, always the master of calculated risk, was threading her into a narrative that could shift the entire balance of power in Port Charles. With Natalia causing chaos, Jason circling in suspicion, and Rick making moves of his own. Willow stepping into Sonny's inner circle wasn't just personal, it was political. The idea of Willow working for Sonny was driving everyone to the brink. Drew saw it as a betrayal. Michael saw it as a threat. Even Carly began to wonder whether Sonny had finally crossed a line too far by involving someone as vulnerable as Willow. But Sonny didn't see vulnerability, he saw resolve. And as he watched her begin to reclaim her strength, he knew that this wasn't just about revenge or rescue. It was about legacy. Willow wasn't just escaping. She was transforming. And that transformation, fueled by Sonny's guidance and her own hard-won awakening, was about to ignite a firestorm no one could contain. Drew had tried to break her. Michael had tried to protect her. But Sonny? Sonny was giving her the tools to burn the entire game to the ground and start again on her own terms. And for the first time in a long time, Willow wasn't looking back. Willow was no longer merely surviving, she was beginning to resist. Every breath she took now was a quiet rebellion against the suffocating world Drew had built around her. A world where love was conditional, truth was manufactured, and control was masked as protection. She had spent too many nights staring into the mirror, barely recognizing the woman who looked back. She had believed, for too long, that Drew was her only path forward after the devastation with Michael. But that illusion was crumbling fast. And in its place was a dawning clarity: Drew was not her salvation. He was her captor. And if she didn't act soon, she would lose everything, including herself. The pressure was mounting. Every conversation with Drew felt more like a negotiation with a man drunk on the idea of power than a partner offering safety. He had begun to monitor her calls. Subtly suggest who she could and couldn't speak with, control what stories about their life could be told in public. He used the children, Wiley and Amelia, not as shared blessings, but as leverage. And now, with the looming custody battle threatening to rip her world apart, Willow realized she was not just in a bad relationship. She was in a dangerous one. Enter Sonny, a name that once represented distance and uncertainty in her life, now emerging as the only anchor in a storm that threatened to pull her under. He didn't come to her with platitudes or pity. He came with truth. Sonny saw what others hadn't dared say aloud, that Willow was trapped, that Drew was unraveling. And that if someone didn't intervene, things would spiral beyond repair. Sonny had been many things in his life, ruthless, feared, revered, but he had never turned away from someone genuinely in need. Especially not the mother of his grandchildren. And in Willow, he saw both desperation and potential. He didn't ask for her loyalty. He offered her a way out. It was a calculated offer, of course. Sonny was no saint, and he understood better than anyone the value of timing, trust, and transformation. But his offer to Willow wasn't just about dismantling Drew's influence, it was about reclaiming hers. He gave her the space to speak freely, to rebuild the shattered pieces of her identity. To begin thinking strategically instead of emotionally. And for the first time in months, Willow felt like she had a voice again. A choice. A future. But nothing this bold comes without risk. Drew sensed the shift immediately. The warmth in Willow's eyes when she spoke of Sonny. The subtle confidence returning to her posture. The questions she dared to ask about their future. It all signaled something dangerous to a man like Drew, independence. And it terrified him. His reaction was swift and chilling. He began planting doubts again. Reminding her of Michael's supposed betrayals, spinning twisted tales of how Sonny used people and discarded them. But Willow no longer swallowed his poison so easily. She was listening, but no longer believing. This only made Drew more erratic. He began showing up unannounced to her meetings, inserting himself into her conversations with Diane. And even trying to control her visits with the children. His facade of calm protector slipped, revealing the calculating man underneath, a man who wasn't trying to co-parent but to dominate. A man who believed that if he couldn't have Willow's love, he'd take her freedom instead. The danger became undeniable. Willow began documenting everything. Recording conversations. Making legal preparations. And through it all, Sonny stood firm, becoming not just her confidant but her shield. He placed his most trusted people around her, ensured she had access to resources. And most importantly, reminded her that she had the right to choose a life beyond fear. But the deeper Willow pulled away, the darker Drew's tactics became. He threatened to expose medical records. To paint her as unstable, to push the narrative that she was manipulated by Sonny and unfit to raise her own children. He had already approached one judge with veiled offers. Would he go as far as bribery or blackmail next? The answer was obvious. Drew had crossed so many lines that the next one would barely register. Still, Willow held her ground. And in the quiet moments, when the weight of it all threatened to crush her, she remembered why she was fighting, not just for herself, but for Wiley and Amelia. They deserved to see their mother strong, not shackled by fear. And if Sonny was the last person willing to stand beside her, so be it. At least he wasn't pretending to be anything he wasn't. But there was another layer of danger lurking. If Drew suspected that Willow and Sonny were aligning, he might become unpredictable. And Sonny knew it. He began preparing not just for a legal fight, but for a personal war. He knew Drew's type, men who wrapped themselves in righteousness while planning ruin. And Sonny had spent a lifetime dismantling men like that. Now, Willow was at the precipice of a new identity. She wasn't just escaping Drew, she was evolving. And the path ahead was littered with risk, betrayal, and backlash. But she had something now that she hadn't had in a long time, direction. And if the world wasn't ready for the Willow who walked away from Drew and stood beside Sonny, it would soon have to face her anyway. Because this wasn't the story of a woman broken by a man. It was the rise of one who refused to be destroyed. Drew was no longer acting like the man Willow once knew. He was evolving into something far more dangerous, something unrecognizable. His obsession with control had grown into a need for destruction. No longer satisfied with manipulating Willow emotionally or using her children as pawns, Drew had shifted into a phase of vengeance that now threatened not just her but everyone she cared about. This wasn't just about a custody battle anymore. It was a campaign of annihilation, a war of erasure. And at the center of it stood Willow. Targeted not only for defying him but for daring to escape the cage he had so carefully built. The warning signs had been there, missed at first, then willfully ignored. The subtle threats in his voice, the sudden withdrawal of support, the reappearance of old contacts with shady intentions. Now, those warnings had transformed into tangible acts. Friends of Willow were being questioned by unknown legal teams. Michael's financial documents had been anonymously submitted for IRS review. And even Sasha had received ominous letters suggesting her mental health history would be made public unless she distanced herself from Willow. It was clear, Drew had declared silent war. But what Drew hadn't calculated for was that Willow no longer stood alone. Jason, having quietly watched Drew spiral for months, finally recognized the danger not just to Willow, but to the fragile balance of the world around her. This wasn't just about a man obsessed with winning, it was about someone weaponizing love, legacy, and law to scorch the earth. Jason had returned to Port Charles to protect those he loved, and now he had a clear target. But Jason's brand of protection wasn't loud or theatrical, it was precise, methodical, and if necessary, brutal. Sonny saw it too. He had once tried to give Drew the benefit of the doubt, even extended quiet respect for his service and redemption story. But those illusions shattered the moment Drew crossed the line into threats and blackmail. When Drew began dragging Sasha, Carly, and even Donna into the fray, Sonny's patience disintegrated. This was no longer about custody or past mistakes. It was about drawing a line in the sand. And that's exactly what Jason and Sonny did, together. For the first time in years. The two men stood on the same side again, united by a common cause, to stop Drew before he took everything from Willow, and from them. Jason focused on gathering hard proof, emails, recordings, whispered deals. Sonny mobilized his network, warning judges and lawyers alike that any cooperation with Drew would come with consequences. No stone was left unturned. Meanwhile, Drew intensified his campaign of chaos. He attempted to force a narrative into the courts that Willow was unstable, unfit, and under the manipulation of criminals. He leaned on allies in government, weaponized gossip through media leaks, and even hinted at criminal charges that could be filed against Michael if he didn't surrender primary custody. It wasn't just malicious, it was surgical. Drew wanted to destroy Willow's credibility, erase her support system, and leave her isolated, dependent, and broken. But Willow didn't break. Instead, she began fighting back, not alone, but surrounded by a wall of resilience forged by those who had once failed her but would not fail again. Carly confronted Drew directly, warning him that if he continued down this path, he would lose not just allies but any shred of decency he had left. Diane built a legal fortress around Willow's parental rights. And Jason stood behind it all, silent, deadly, and ready to end the threat if Drew refused to stand down. And yet, Drew couldn't. His delusion had metastasized into obsession. He began seeing Jason and Sonny as enemies from a war he never left. Convinced that their power, their reach, and their legacy had always been obstacles to his rise. He didn't just want to beat them, he wanted to replace them. In his eyes, taking Willow, the children, and the empire that supported them wasn't cruelty, it was conquest. But every move Drew made only tightened the circle around him. What he didn't realize was that by targeting Willow, he awakened the full force of Jason's protection instincts and Sonny's lethal loyalty. They were no longer playing defense. They were preparing to finish this. And Willow, once timid, confused, and paralyzed by guilt, was now clear-eyed and resolute. She began testifying not just in court but in the court of public opinion. She spoke to judges, child welfare advocates, and even the press. She didn't present herself as a victim. She presented herself as a mother, a fighter, and a woman reclaiming her life. The more Drew tried to silence her, the louder her truth became. In the shadows of this war, alliances were shifting. Sam was beginning to question Drew's sanity. Nina, despite her history with Willow, saw Drew's brutality for what it was and began quietly passing information to Jason. Even Scout, Drew's own daughter, grew distant, sensing the darkness that had overtaken him. Drew had reached a point of no return. And he didn't care. But Jason and Sonny did. They wouldn't let him destroy another person they cared about. And if this was going to be a war, it would be one that Drew couldn't win. Because the moment he turned his wrath toward Willow, Drew stopped being a man seeking justice and became a threat that had to be neutralized. And Jason, flanked by Sonny, bolstered by the truth, and driven by loyalty, was already loading the final shot.